Welcome back to the Ed Show. That was the late Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia speaking on the eve of the Iraq War back in 2003. 10 years later, we find ourselves in a similar position as President Obama decides how to respond to reported widespread chemical attacks in Syria. Secretary of State John Kerry issued a statement saying the Obama administration was consulting with allies and members of Congress. According to officials, a U.S. military strike could launch as early as Thursday. Britain's Prime Minister David Cameron has recalled Parliament from their summer vacation to vote on whether Britain should take part in military action. In the meantime, the United States Congress remains in recess. They're not scheduled to be in session until September 9th. House Speaker John Boehner has had preliminary communication with the White House, but according to a spokesman, Boehner, quote, has made it clear that before any action is taken, there must be meaningful consultation with members of Congress. Joining me now on our rapid response panel, MSNBC military analyst and Medal of Honor winner recipient, and that would be Colonel Jack Jacobs. And also with us tonight, Robert Greenwald, political activist and founder of Brave New Films. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight. There is a lot to unpack here, Colonel, no question about it. What would be the criteria of a strike? How much latitude is the president going to have without going to Congress?
Oh, I think he's got enormous latitude. As long as he doesn't put people on the ground, I think the Congress will probably let him do whatever he wants. The Congress can always stop everything because they control the Congress controls the purse strings, but they're A, out of session, B, they are ominously silent, and C, there's been a lot of pressure on the president from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue to actually act in this case, so I don't think you're going to hear anything from Congress.
How tough would a surgical strike be? Do we have immense capability? I mean, the Russians are very close to the Syrians. If we get into it with them, is this going to be American technology versus Russian technology?
Oh, I think you'll see that. You and I were talking earlier about the fact that there's a good possibility that the Syrians have the latest in Russian technology and that there will be the battle of the technologies. In terms of what we can do and what we will do, those are two different things. We have the capability to do enormous damage to the Syrians, but we're not going to do very much. It is going to be a message because we backed ourselves into a corner by saying we will strike, and now we have to strike. But I think it's, by and large, it's going to be just a message and nothing more. We'll probably attack airfields, make it extremely difficult for the Syrian Air Force to ever get up again, and we will attack launch platforms like missile platforms and so on, many of which are mobile, but attacking troop formations, putting troops on the ground and so on, we're unlikely to do.
Robert Greenwald, it doesn't sound like if, it sounds like when. And recent polling shows that the American people aren't really too fired up about all of this. 42% of Americans prefer to provide only humanitarian assistance. How does this play, in your opinion, with the American people? What would be the aftermath of a strike?
Well, first of all, talking about the American people, Ed, I want to just say for myself and so many people I've gotten emails and Facebook and tweets, all people who are dancing in the streets and happy that you're back on the air nightly.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
To have you, and good to have you asking these questions. Look, the opinion polls are very clear in terms of what the American people want. Unfortunately, tragically, sadly, we see a small group of people in Washington making decisions without consulting Congress, without consulting the American people, and it's very hard to fathom how this ends. We know it's easy to get into a war. We know the wrong people always wind up getting killed. How do you get out, and how does a bombing save one life of one Syrian? I defy anyone to explain that to us.
Well, do you think there should be a response to the Syrians now that we have evidence that they have used chemical weapons on civilians?
Absolutely. The chemical weapons are beyond horrific, awful. You can't look at those pictures without being deeply affected, and the response must be aggressive forcing and bringing together the different parties so there's a ceasefire. That's the only way it's going to end. Both the sides in the Syrian conflict are getting money and they're getting military support from outsiders, the Syrian government and the rebels. That needs to be stopped. And the only possible way will be bringing people for a ceasefire. It's never, ever going to end by more strikes, more bombing, and more killing.
Colonel, the response to the response, what kind of capability does Syria have?
Well, they have great regional and local capability, and you can bet that one of the reasons we haven't launched anything yet is because, among other people, we're talking to the Israelis, because the Israelis and we assume that any attack on Syria is liable to engender a response on Israel from Syria. And don't forget, you've got Iran in the mix as well. Now, it's very, very dangerous. You mentioned the Russians, too, and it's worth bringing this up again. The Syrians on the ground are not manning all this stuff by themselves. The Russians are on the ground. They have advisors, both military and civilian advisors, on the ground. And you can bet that collateral damage is liable to be the killing of Russian citizens in Syria. And one of the things that's keeping us from launching anything right away, and has been for a long time, is the Russians involved. They don't want us to get involved. The Russians don't, for a wide variety of reasons. And it's the Russian presence on the ground in Syria ought to give us pause.
Okay. Robert Greenwald, quickly, what if President Obama does nothing? What if we just we watch this unfold and the United States does nothing?
Well, I think the thing we should be doing, as I said, is pushing hard for a peace conference. You know, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff talked about, look, military can tip the military balance, but it can't deal with the fundamental problems here, which is our religious, ethnic, tribal, long-term civil war that's going on. And we can use our resources. We can bring pressure to bear on our allies and the people who are opposing so that there's some kind of an effort to end the war. And the only way that's going to happen, Ed, I mean, it sounds simple, but it's the only way, and it's very complicated, it's very hard, is with bringing the parties together and ending the conflict.
Colonel, we've got 2 carrier groups in the area, and we've got airstrike capability from Turkey. Would that be enough?
Yes, it depends on what your objective is, and I think our objective is extremely limited. If we were to launch an attack, it would be merely to send a message to Assad and to fulfill the promise that the president, I think in mistake, made when he said they use chemical weapons, we're going to act. Don't announce in advance what you're going to do. But now, having said that, the short answer is yes, that's plenty of capability.
Okay, Colonel Jack Jacobs and Robert Greenwald, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks.